जो काम था भाई का वो बहन ने संभाला, जलते हुए खेमे से भतीजे को निकाला। दम तोड़ गया सामने हर गोद का पाला, लब तक न बर आया दिले बेताब से नाला। ऐलान कुना ना लाए तकबीर थी ज़ैनब, हाँ नशरे मकसदे शब्बीर थी ज़ैनब। फिर उठी बड़े अज़्म से हैदर की दुलारी, एक चोब जले खेमे की हाथों में उठाई। सुनसान बेआबां पर पहले तो नज़र की, फिरने लगी फिर खेमों के चौगिर्द वो बीबी। अल्लाह रे हिम्मत बड़ी ज़ीशान थी ज़ैनब, सोए हुए बच्चों की निगहबान थी ज़ैनब।
ये जो रूहानी आवाज़ आपने अभी सुनी, ये मरियम रज़ा हैदर की आवाज़ थी। और मैं हूँ सबीका मुज़फ़्फ़र। मरियम और मैं आपके लिए लाए हैं छठा एपिसोड मैं भी मुस्लिम का, जहाँ हम अपनी हिंदुस्तानियत और मुसलमानियत के बीच के फ़ासले मापने की कोशिश करते हैं, इस उम्मीद में कि एपिसोड दर एपिसोड ये फ़ासले थोड़े से कम हो जाएंगे। टेक इट ओवर फ्रॉम देयर।
आज जो हम बातें करेंगे उससे शायद 1400 साल के फासले थोड़े कम हो जाएंगे, because the event and the person that we will talk about existed and happened 1400 years ago in the 7th century AD. But before I dive into that, I just want to say कि जो मैंने अभी ये दो बंद पढ़े ये मेरे लिखे हुए नहीं हैं, दे आर पार्ट ऑफ अ नोहा जो मैं बचपन में रिसाइट करती थी. And if anyone knows the author of these lines, please do let me know. So going back to what happened 1400 years ago, as we had discussed a couple of weeks ago in our live session, the month of Muharram is the time that Shias across the world commemorate in recognition of the Battle of Karbala, which happened in 7th century AD. Now, the Battle of Karbala happened between Yazid, who was at that time the ruler of the so-called also known Islamic world, and Hussein. Hussein was the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. And this Karbala battle is significant of the message that it carries until today. Now, the battle that happened primarily happened because Yazid, as the king, wanted to legitimize his position as the ruler by getting the public approval of his leadership from Hussein. And he knew that Hussein had a very strong following because he came from the family of the Prophet. Hussein refused to pledge allegiance to him because Yazid was, as per historical records, a tyrant, a despot, and he had turned what the Prophet had aspired to become an example of a society, he had turned it into a morally corrupt, an unjust society. And Hussein knew that he would never ever pledge allegiance to a king or a ruler who had erased the very principles of governance, of justice, of morality that the Prophet had initiated in his lifetime. So Yazid understood that if Hussein goes against him and if there is a strong rebellion against Yazid, he probably would lose the seat of his he would probably lose his throne. So the Battle of Karbala happened to quell a prospective rebellion, and this was not a battle of equals in any regard, and not just an equal, but also the fact that Hussein only had a caravan of 70 people that fought against an army of 1,000 or more. So Hussein always knew that he's going to lose this battle, and he did. he, along with all the men who had fought in the army, who had fought in the battle, lost their lives. However, this is where Zainab, who was the sister of Hussein, her story takes the shape and form of what we today understand Karbala as, because she was held prisoner, but she started what today we know as the events of Karbala. Had Zainab not started the storytelling that she did through the form of congregation, through the form of a majlis, we wouldn't really know Karbala and its message of standing up to the unjust, standing for the truth, standing for the conscience, like we know today.
तो मुझे जो एक चीज़ है जो बहुत फैसिनेटिंग लगती है तुम्हारी और मेरी जर्नी के बारे में, विच इज़ क्लोजली एसोसिएटेड विथ why we're doing this episode today, is that of course, as two Shia Muslim women, we've grown up with the traditions of Muharram, which is essentially an oral storytelling tradition, जिसमें oral storytelling बहुत forms में explore की जाती है. तो what I was mostly fascinated about is how ये जो 1400 साल पुरानी कहानी है, ये हमने हर साल दर साल सुनी है, लेकिन शायद उतने अटैच्ड कभी नहीं हुए, उतना अटैचमेंट कभी हमने फील नहीं किया जितना शायद इस साल फील कर रहे हैं. सो आई रियली डू वांट टू also, let's say, ride this excitement wave. And yeah, I also want to talk about Zainab. And of course, thank you so much for taking us all the way to why we're talking about Zainab in the first place, and then going on to talk about the context in which Zainab was placed. But now let's just, I think, delve into why you and I find Zainab so fascinating.
So there are multiple, I would say, reasons as to why I have begun to understand how Zainab can influence me as a Muslim woman leader. And I think मैं उसी से शुरू करना चाहूँगी कि जब तुमने और मैंने ये पॉडकास्ट शुरू किया, the core reason was that we wanted to become the voices or become the voice of the Muslim woman leader that we have never seen or emerge with the same kind of experiences or journey that we have lived. And जब तुमने और मैंने ये बातें करना शुरू किया, वी रियलाइज कि हमारी कहानियाँ सिर्फ हम ही उस तरीके से सुना सकते हैं जिसके ज़रिए हमें कॉन्फिडेंस आए टू recognize our identity as Muslim women and to stand up for that identity as Muslim women. And when I look at Zainab, for me, for the first time perhaps, I can closely associate to a Muslim woman who had to stand up, who didn't have to, but she stood up for the rights of her family, for the rights of her own person, for her own individuality. And she did that with extreme, I would say, guts and fearlessness. So मेरे लिए that is why the story and the lesson and the personality of Zainab is very relevant today.
So just allow me to do a quick insert because I'm not sure if we established this, but Zainab is essentially Hussein's sister, but for the sake of this podcast, let's say Hussein is Zainab's brother. And apart from this, of course, Hussein was the, if I'm not wrong, the grandson of Muhammad. So why am I saying if I'm not wrong? I am also establishing very clearly that neither Mariyam nor I are experts, and we're not posing as researchers who are adding any form of, let's say, fresh research through this podcast. What we are hoping to do is, by virtue of being, let's say, the fringe Muslims, the kind of Muslims who haven't necessarily found the Islamic history as fascinating as we do now. Just also, we hope that through us and through our engagement with this story and with this newfound like love for Zainab, those of you who are completely new to this story too, find a way, like find an in point into something that might be very distant for you as well. So that's essentially yeah, the point at which I would now want us to start tripping, because we're clearly tripping on Zainab for a while. uh, so let's just say, let the trip begin. So yeah, like I'm just going to build on what Mariam just said, कि जहाँ पे इस पॉडकास्ट की शुरुआत हुई थी वो कहीं ना कहीं connected है शाहीन बाग से. So in some sense we do see Zainab as a Shaheen Baghi or a royal rebel, as literally as someone could be a royal rebel. So of course, this might be me oversimplifying it or distilling it too much, but essentially, what was happening then and what is happening now, is sort of connected in my head, at least, as like a sense of democracy being challenged. Of course, the democracy then and the democracy now are मतलब बहुत बहुत फ़र्क है, बिकॉज कई 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 साल गुजर चुके हैं और हम लोग अभी जैसे इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी को witness कर रहे हैं versus what they were probably struggling with. But let's say in a very fundamental sense, what Hussein and the clan of 72, that was sort of in a civil disobedience movement, challenging Yazid and his army, was like basically challenging the idea of monarchy. And yeah, like I do think that those were probably the beginnings of democracy as we know it now. So coming back to Zainab, I want to start with maybe Mariam telling us the basic sort of, let's say, identifiers that you associate with Zainab. When you think of Zainab, what are the first few words that come to your mind?
As I said, fearlessness and having an agency of your own, recognizing that your words have the capacity to cut through the lies that were being spread about your family and about your identity. So I think, again, that is something which I closely resonate with. And I'll give a very small context to when we are talking about Zainab, we are talking about her as a public leader. It is because the story of Karbala that we know today is relevant and present because of Zainab. So हमने बहुत बहुत briefly बात करी थी about the concept of majlis within the Shias, especially during Muharram. And majlis is nothing but a congregation of people where they come together and they listen to some of the Islamic tenets, and they can be around philosophy, they can be around education, family issues, everything. And then you listen to the part of what happened in Karbala. So the majlis comprises these two elements where you learn about Islam and you learn about Karbala. And the very first majlis was established by Zainab after they all were taken prisoners, and Hussein and everyone else was killed. And Zainab knew that once taken prisoner, as the proverb goes, that you as a historian you'll always know the story of the hunter, not the hunted. And Zainab knew if she did not raise her voice, if she did not tell people the actual realities and the truth of what happened in Karbala, we would never know what really happened. The truth would never come out. And so she started the first majlis. She started talking about what had happened. She ensured that through, as you said, oral storytelling, through the craft of her narrative, she got the story to us. And it's 1400 years that we still know the story of Karbala. And never in the history of Islam, or I don't know if they're about other religions, but never in the history of Islam has a woman-led storytelling movement gained that much ground and resonated until the 21st century. So it's remarkable to think of what one woman achieved in the 7th century.
This is giving me a lot of goose flesh ripples. Exactly, because also let's not forget that 1400 years from then, we have access to WhatsApp, to Twitter, to like all forms of social media. It wasn't easy to ensure that a story gets told and retold in, like, the exact same way as much as possible over the years. And yeah, so as Mariam just established, she was the inventor of the majlis. And of course, majlis roughly translates to, a gathering or a congregation. But in some sense, for me, the translation I stick by is that, in some sense, the first majlis was definitely also the first protest ground, in a silent protest sort of a way. By not silent, actually, a peaceful protest.
Sit-in. You would say a sit-in.
Yes. Wow. Thanks. It was the first sitting. Yes. And I think the first three मजलिसेस जो पहली तीन मजलिसें थीं वो डमास्कस में ही, दमिश्क में ही की गई, जिसका मतलब ये है कि शी bargained with Yazid to ensure that the same space that was qaid for them could transform into a liberation ground, and could commemorate the loss of the prophet. And I what I find very fascinating is, in general in history, how often do we have the certainty that we're seeing something from a woman's perspective at all. So, I mean, of course, history has been broken up as his story again and again. So, for the first time, at least with clarity, I know that this wasn't his story, but her story. Or let's say, his story told as her story.
Yeah. I think another aspect about Zainab, again, going back to our understanding of how we look ourselves as Muslim women leaders, is the fact that she ensured that while she was the leader, no one was admonished from not being a leader. Zainab did start the majlis, but today you have countless thousands of women across the globe who are talking about what Zainab was saying in those times. And so she, I mean, that's one aspect of leadership that I admire so much. That you are a leader without claiming the stage. You're actually giving the stage to other people to voice what they want to. And that is the power of leadership. So Zainab, I don't know how she did that. I don't know how she did that in prison. And I don't know how she managed to do that after being released from prison. But the way she did it is the reason why we still have that continuing sense of building leadership, building solidarity. Like when we look at Shaheen Bagh, when I was witnessing what was happening in Shaheen Bagh, again as a secondary witness, not someone who was primarily there, I was evoked not by one woman. I was evoked by countless of women who were just standing up for that one message, for that one solidarity message. And I think Zainab instills that in me when I think of her, that she is not saying directly to me that stand up for the cause of Hussein, quote unquote, stand up for the cause of Islam, quote unquote. She's saying stand up for the right cause, stand up for feminism, stand up against patriarchy, stand up against evil forces, stand up against the right that you have as a human being in this world.
Stand up for your conscience, stand up for,
yes,
higher consciousness. Again, must acknowledge more goose flesh ripples. और मतलब मैं of course बात को थोड़ा आगे, considering we're talking feminism now, I want to also acknowledge कि हाँ, मतलब शुरुआत ज़ैनब ने ज़रूर की, मगर of course कई जो लोग नोहे लिख रहे हैं या मर्सिया लिख रहे हैं, ज़रूरी नहीं है कि हर किसी ने एक फेमिनिन पर्सपेक्टिव से ही उसको लिखा हो. तो कई बार मैं ये सवाल उठाती हूँ कि ज़ैनब को एक बहुत ही स्टोइक और लेट्स से खूब लड़ी मर्दानी, वो तो झांसी वाली रानी थी वाले मर्दाना आई थिंक एडजेक्टिव से एसोसिएट किया गया है. But I do want to bring in my own perspective here and say that if you think about it, Muharram is so unique that it sort of encourages crying in public. It's sort of an extended condolence ceremony that spreads over almost 2.5 months. I do not know of anything that sort of allows you to cry freely in front of other people, and in that sense it is actually something which has always been associated with women and with feminine energy, emotionality. Let's just not even look at it as crying. Let's just look at it as the ability to be together and sort of be able to stay in touch with your emotions and your emotionality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, that is a very solid connection that I feel with Zainab, because at various points I have established to Mariyam that for me, she's not just a podcast co-host by virtue of her being a Shia Muslim woman, because that was something we discovered much later. That oh acha tum Shia ho, acha ho main bhi Shia hu. So it was almost like an accident of sorts, like of course a happy coincidence, a happy accident. But what I'm getting at is that I've also established that to Mariam in my personal calls that I feel like we're the same emotional age, and that comes from us having been in therapy for roughly the same amount of time. And of course, the perspective that we try to bring to Main Bhi Muslim is constantly an emotionally intelligent perspective, and therefore establishing this connection with Zainab is very important for me, at least, where I look at her as stoic, yes, but not bereft of emotion. Quite on the contrary, as someone who is constantly reminding you to stay in touch with your emotions.
Yeah. I think thank you for saying that, Sabika, because a lot of times जब हम मजलिसों में जाते हैं, unfortunately, so there is a constant chiming of riqqat, and the word riqqat, I don't have the clear translation of it, but I think riqqat means that to swell up with emotions and with tears. और बहुत ज़्यादा emphasis होता है रिक्कत पर कि आपको रोना आए, आपको कहानी सुन के you get moved when Karbala's events unfold, which I think happens as one of the major outlets when you are listening to a heart-wrenching story. But as you said, how do you translate that emotional range into a sense of narration that can shake the mightiest of power structures? And I think that is exactly what Zainab did. I mean, the pain she was carrying, the responsibility that she was carrying, the responsibility of the grief that she was carrying, she translated that into her storytelling, which is why each one of us today remembers Karbala. Again, going back to the story of Karbala, we don't necessarily, I mean, I will have to Google more about the Umayyad Caliphate to understand kiska succession kahan tha, why. I mean, no one remembers the Umayyad Caliphate. No one remembers the army that Yazid had. And so that's what Zainab did. She translated her grief, she translated her pain and her agony into such a force that even the most mightiest of the army couldn't reckon with it.
Yeah,
and they had never anticipated it. I think what they also didn't realize was that, again, I'm going back to the idea of feminism, they did not anticipate that women could take charge. That is why women were held prisoners. उनको दबा देंगे ना, उनको चुप करा देंगे. हम लोग सुनते हैं कि औरतों के पर्दे छीन लिए गए and they were like walked through the halls of Damascus and the streets of Damascus, because you underestimate the power of women. You underestimate that women can change the course of history. And they did that. They killed all the men. And then what happened, you know?
This sort of also is putting me in this like new perspective. Let's say it's giving me access to this new perspective that she was also telling us how to tell a story, right? You know, in a way she humanized it. And that also brings me to the concept of grief being so closely associated with loss, and what you also said earlier about you know we always hear the story of the hunter and not the hunted. What I am gradually with this conversation realizing is that um, doesn't fearlessness also get born with loss? There is a certain sense of या तो आप वो वाला पर्सपेक्टिव लेंगे कि ऑल इज़ लॉस्ट एंड कोई पॉइंट नहीं है, और यू विल से कि ऑल इज़ लॉस्ट एंड अब किसी से डरने का कोई पॉइंट नहीं है. And you and I, episode after episode, have talked about our own personal losses and how they have shaped our identities. And how it is very, like, I think loss is powerful. And the power of loss is what she sort of, has encapsulated so well. And it also sort of just makes me want to stay with this for maybe the next few years, I don't know, like, and just really think about how can I learn how to tell a story from Zainab.
I think you've beautifully ended it, so I don't want to add anything else to it. How do I want to tell a story like Zainab did is perhaps one of the most remarkable lessons I'll carry with me for a long time as well. So I think there will be a lot more discussions that will open up as we walk through this gamut of discussions that we've opened through just one episode. But I think for now, I think we've given our audiences a lot to think over because I'm thinking a lot as well.
Yeah, I hope you can hear our thinking pauses and be a part of these pregnant pauses, and hope life sprouts out of these pregnant pauses soon. We would really encourage you to, I mean, if this podcast has in any way got you even partially as excited as we are, then I would really hope that you do your own readings, because of course we don't want to, like I said earlier, pose as people who know it all. Quite on the contrary, if we can be something, we can just be that exciting force that leads you to more readings. And Mariyam is definitely someone who loves putting, you know, her favorite readings on our Instagram page. So please do follow us on Main Bhi Muslim, MAINPHIMUSLIM on Instagram. And please tell us your stories and tell us how whatever stories we're sharing, including Zainab's story, influences you or affects you or helps you build a relationship with one of the most misunderstood religions. So yeah, with that, let's hope that we feel our way to an understanding.